Okay, we have a few more people joining us.
I guess we can wait for 2 more minutes.
We have a few more people joining us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so perhaps we could slowly start.
Okay, so
so if you don't mind, I will take over the introduction and then you can start with the lecture. So welcome everybody to today's first event, which is a keynote lecture. I am Barbara Valikova and I'm a PhD candidate at the Central European University. And it is my honor to welcome Dr. Artemy Magun here today. Dr. Magun was born in Leningrad. He studied in Moscow, in the US and in France. He gained his PhD in political science at the University of Michigan in 2003. Then he returned to his home city where he became a professor at European University at St. Petersburg. He is also a director of the Stasis Center for Practical Philosophy and an editor-in-chief of the academic journal Stasis. He is also a member of an artistic group and an author of many academic articles and also books, amongst others, The Negative Revolution and Unity and Solitude, which is a highly acclaimed book published in Russian. As for today's lecture, it will be on the University of the Future. Dr. Magun will talk about the concept as well as the challenges related to it. He will go over the changes that universities had to face over the past 50 years and discuss the bureaucratic and efficiency-oriented sort of direction that universities took in the past, and also the struggle between the positivist and critical paradigms and the interdisciplinarity within the universities, and talk about what can be done about the issues, about possible ways out, and how can we achieve this university of the future. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat and we will address them during the Q&A session after the lecture. And without any further ado, I will let you start with your lecture if you would like to.
Okay, thank you. Basically, Barbara already spelled out the content of my talk, so it will be superfluous maybe to speak even. But I will give you a short talk, and then we can exchange our views together. So I don't know how we have hour and a half, right? Or no, an hour.
It should be an hour, yeah, approximately.
Yeah, an hour. Yeah, so I will speak for 10 minutes and then we can discuss. And I will be reading from a paper, so I apologize. I will not look at you. But you will have it will look like I'm looking at you, but I will not. So if you want to interrupt me, do it through sound. So by today, university has been in continuous crisis for decades, even though in some countries, in the leading countries, this crisis led to a more or less stable disequilibrium. So nothing immediately threatens the existence of the university. Of course, nevertheless, people who are inside, they feel symptoms of a malaise, I would say. So in my view, this crisis mostly proceeds from the ambivalent role that the autonomy of the university from the rest of the society, the role that this autonomy plays. This role is ambivalent. And actually, both this autonomy and the efforts to overcome it have long-term pernicious effects. The academic autonomy, as it had existed in the mid-20th century and still partly continues to exist through inertia, meant something like an ivory tower for a few highly erudite scholars and for a few elite students. Obviously, more students than scholars, but it was still not much. I think about 3% of the population in America went through college in the early 20th century, mid 20th century more, but it's only then that the actual massification of the university started. And this massification eroded the autonomy. There were many more students and actually also many more faculty, and so there couldn't be only star students and star faculty. Even though in places like Harvard or Princeton, they still maintain the elite status of the faculty, with students already even there, doesn't fully work. At the same time, in the 20th century United States, in the second half of the 20th century, United States managed to build an imperial university model, where the very high salaries in the academia allowed to drain faculty from the rest of the world and to offer them full academic freedom and high social status, not only money. Therefore, the leading European countries, not speaking of the Asian countries, had to compete and to partly match this system, but of course they didn't have enough resources. So this led to a creation, at least in Europe, of a highly conservative bottleneck system of universities with a few privileged faculty and the overproduction of graduates. So a combination of the emulation of America and of the inertia led in Europe to a state of crisis, which we continue witnessing. While a combination of other factors allowed American universities, the best American universities, to balance academic freedom with a strong professional culture that required from professors to publish, to maintain their qualification level, even beyond tenure, which is not necessarily always the case. Therefore, in United States, the conservative culture of the university gradually changed, and even the ideology changed. So, if in the mid-20th century the university was conservative everywhere, ideologically conservative, I mean, liberal conservative sometimes, then, of course, as you know, today the university, particularly the American university, is ideologically very critical. Its ideology is liberal leftist. And on the one hand, this is a result, the direct result of the massification of the university. Actually, simpler people came into the university and these started to feel. At the same time, even this liberal leftist outlook, as we know, turned into an elitist ethical creed these days. So there are the continuously interacting two forces, actually. The force that pushes towards autonomy and the force that pushes towards the outer society, let's put it this way. All of these tendencies towards massification didn't help to overcome even the even in the United States. Another consequence of university autonomy, academic autonomy, which is the growing internal division and the compartmentalization, sorry for this long word, compartmentalization of knowledge into disciplines, a perversion actually of the original Humboldtian model, which implied a harmonious concert of faculties that closely interacted with each other. But nevertheless, it was Humboldt and his colleagues who introduced the multi-faculty, multi-discipline notion of the university. In the contemporary university, there are actually two levels of division. The first and main one, which is a fruit of an actual deep antagonism, is the split between the hard science, the social science, and humanities. And these are the actual internal contradictions of the society, of the modern society, which are irresolvable if closed down into this how to say into this sphere of the university. Within the university, of course, you cannot resolve that. Therefore, they continue splitting it and preventing it from carrying a united front. So for me, this is fun, again, from the universal perspective, this is the key thing. This division between the subjectivist and objectivist knowledge. Nevertheless, on the surface of this deeper antagonism, there is the division between many different disciplines, which have once been divided through their object of study. This is sociology, political science, anthropology, geography, history, and this only if we speak of social science. Actually, their evolution made them increasingly similar to each other in their scope, in their object, because today political science, sociology, even history, they more or less study the same things, but for different methods and referring to different intellectual traditions. Therefore, their division, the multi-faculty structure of the contemporary university looks increasingly irrational. This is an irrational symptom of some rational process, but it looks pretty strange if we don't consider the history, if we don't understand this fundamental divide. Then one would ask, why do you need so many different disciplines if you just study society? If there is a crisis, this is its symptom. If we take philosophy, my discipline, as you know, it is bitterly split into the analytic and continental one. So this is a split within one discipline. If other disciplines are maybe there are too many disciplines for the same object. Here it's the opposite. It's one discipline, philosophy, but it's totally divided and actually irreconcilable. So it embodies the contradiction in itself, while philosophy normally should be some kind of uniting meta level for all faculties, but of course, being split, it cannot play this role, and it doesn't play it. We know. So, philosophy is in a very deep crisis, and this is a symptom of the crisis of the university. All of this, of course, contributes to the loss of any socio-political authority of knowledge. Because if a university cannot make a one or at least even two theories about how world is structured and what the truth is about, then the university doesn't count for anything, except, of course, the fields where university professors bring technological and technocratic knowledge. So if we have a result in virusology, for example, then everyone is happy. Then it's a question of testing, etc. And of course, the university is respected for that. But when we start to discuss the nature of viruses and what generally the pandemics like this are about, then already the authority of objective knowledge somehow fades. Not speaking again of the larger ethical normative issues. And this is particularly particularly a problem of the Anglo-Saxon space, because the US and the British professors are almost absent in the public mediatic sphere. There are very few public intellectuals, and this has to do with a certain history of these Anglo-Saxon space. Particularly true for United States more than for Britain. And this is, of course, one component of the crisis that we are talking about. And of course, this accepts doctors or economists, as I already said. Doctors and economists are everywhere in the newspapers, but hardly anyone else. Massification of the university and its division into the irreconcilable perspectives have together led, in the neoliberal climate of the 1990s, to the emergence of a managerial and entrepreneurial university. Management now plays more role than the faculty's self-governance, and this managerial turns university towards the market, of course. Both literally, in the sense that you get grants for the research of this or that kind, and more indirectly, in the sense that the market mechanisms are emulated within the university by making a comparison between the functioning of research and teaching and the functioning of a business efficient firm. So hence the demand for productivity, for example, and other KPIs that are introduced into the university. Many of these measures actually have had a larger impact in Europe and Asia rather than in the United States. And they were often introduced along the imperial model that I mentioned as Americanization of higher education. Enough to mention the Bologna process. But the result was a much more formalized and bureaucratized mechanism of university, giving even more power to managers, to administrators, than in the United States themselves. So it was a bad imitation. The imitation of the imperial hegemonic model, which cannot be reproduced as it is. Therefore, the so-called Americanization led to the loss of autonomy, to the further loss of autonomy by the universities, led to formalization and bureaucratization, and actually didn't really change the composition of academic power, in the sense that American universities continue to be the leading ones. The European universities generally cannot compete with them in the equal level, but they again formalized some of the American practices. The measures of this neoliberal revolution were, in fact, not only negative. Some of them were quite useful. They were rightly planned, to the degree that they tried to break through the inertial autonomy of these university ivory towers that pre-exist. The task was noble. The task was to open up the universities to the social practice. It is the managerial turn, for instance, that pressures currently for the creation of interdisciplinary structures. Scholars by themselves probably wouldn't do much interdisciplinarity. They are trained into their disciplines, but the universities and some of the market forces, create advanced study centers, create new object-driven fields, such as women's studies, for instance. There are also applied schools in the universities, such as School of Education or School of Public Policy, which also kind of push for interdisciplinarity. So this is good. However, from what I can judge, these measures have so far met with very limited success. The disciplines continue to treat each other as raw materials for their own very professionalized texts. There is no real dialogue. And when you bring natural scientists in, and usually they bring natural scientists into these collectives, this leads to some kind of subordination, subsumption of social sciences and humanities under these or that ideology of natural science. Because of course, natural scientists, apart from their method, they also have their own spontaneous philosophy, which is usually positivist or evolutionist, something like that. And this is actually what wins when you push for interdisciplinarity. So there is no real integration. There is the either or struggle for power. Without a pressure from above, no disciplinary integration is happening. But such a pressure can only come from managers, and managers are formalistic. Because the university is so split, so divided, the managers can only be formalistic. And since they are formalistic, they of course cannot lead this effort to interdisciplinarity. Again, the imperialist character of this managerial revolution did many good things outside the United States. It often intervened at a point where the elite intellectuals started losing both an ethical commitment to scholarship. Some had stopped publishing, and this is particularly true of these societies in crisis, such as Russia, for example, where I come from, other Central and Eastern European countries. Of course, there was a certain anomia in the university, which again was a bad result of autonomy. And it was a good thing that the managerial revolution actually started to force people to publish, because people started parasitizing on their academic posts. Nevertheless, of course, again, this remained exclusively formal. There was also a good effort to open up the university to the correct understanding of new social tendencies, some vectors of the development in the society. Again, per se, this is good. The problem is that this is only done through the market adaptation. At the same time, the negative result of the managerial revolution was again the bureaucratization. Then next, the quite natural pressure towards the more positivist, more pragmatic, more applied knowledge, because the managers, even if they are formalistic, they have their own spontaneous ideology, and the ideology of managers is, of course, positivism and pragmatism. So this is what they apply. And in the contemporary university, as you know, humanities, with their critical and totalizing and historicizing perspectives, they fall into the subordinate position. So they are the least pragmatic of the disciplines, even though they are also changed into that direction. So the managerialization generally worked to introduce the adaptive model of the university, as Geert Biesta, a Dutch scholar writing on the university, he calls this adaptive university, because the faculty is subsumed by the practical tasks that come from the outside, such as economy, such as moral ideologies that are widespread in the society, while normally intellectuals should lead the society, not only in the sense of giving some answers to the questions that society puts, like please invent a vaccine, and then they invent a vaccine. But they normally intellectuals should put forward the questions to the society. The university should produce questions, not answers. You know, these ideas, the ideas about the leading role of the universities, of course, can be used by some pleasant and unpleasant political forces. But nevertheless, there is an obvious truth to these claims, and there is an obvious niche, the unfilled place of intellectual authority in the society. And if the university doesn't step into this empty place, then the managers will step into this place, as I already mentioned. The core problem behind this crisis, as Marx already saw, is the division into intellectual and manual labor, a split that permeates the society, that actually is the core of the class division, but it also is a split that is reflected in the university, within the intellectual sphere of the society. The more strict, the more divided are the intellectual and the manual labor, the more let's say unfree become both these spheres, the intellectual and the manual labor. Of course, in today's society, a large part of the actual labor is intellectual. So in this sense, the university is not so alone. Intellectuals of the university are not alone. Everyone, well, many people in the society do intellectual labor. But this objective process, which is a very beneficial process, is not further translated into a new totalized system of knowledge. This split falls into the existing structure of division. And as I mentioned, the society is divided, the university is autonomized, and then the university is split within, from within. So this again, very beneficial process of cognitivization of labor should be reflected in the structure of university, which would allow us to have an adequate reflection, adequate societal reflection of the society. Societal reflection over itself. It would allow society to cultivate intellect, to cultivate its own intellect, which doesn't necessarily happen in the firms, where it is simply used and repeated. So now to conclude, what is to be done? As we have seen, autonomy is not an answer. Autonomy is very problematic. Democracy, furthermore, is not an answer. Because if you give democracy to what? To these subdivided elements, to this very subdivided field, then it will be simply self-interested egoism, a self-interested policy of each of these subdivided subdisciplines within the university. Same is true, by the way, of the larger society, but that's another conversation. The only solution for the university's problem is the return of the university into a leading position in the society. This would require an internal revolution in the redistribution of authority from objectivist hard sciences to theory. In many of its shapes, we can say that we can return power to philosophy if philosophy itself is reformed and the split between objectivist and subjectivist reason is overcome. Thus, the relationship between the university and society should change, but not towards the market mode of the subordination of university to the society. Instead, and this is what I propose in the utopian mode, there should be an institutionalized exchange between society's organizations, such as firms, state bureaus, etc., corporations, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the university as a semi-autonomous intellectual center. So the institutionalized exchange between these two spheres should consist in a generalized system of internship, so that, for instance, and one can discuss the details, all the university faculty are obliged throughout their career to spend a year in a sphere of real economy, maybe of their choice, while all the non-university professionals are required to return to university to study at least once at their mature age. And again, some of these things are being pushed for by the managers even now. There are corporate universities, but again, the place of free knowledge is unclear there. In the Russian education, for example, it's very important for the Ministry of Education to push the universities to introduce practices, what they call practices, which is the system of internship. But this is only internship for the students, not for the faculty, which creates a strange asymmetry. And it is absolutely unclear how these practices should function in the case of the theoretical sciences, such as social sciences or humanities. Usually this means that students are simply sent to research institutes to spend some time, which really makes this policy into a nonsense, while the idea is good. So, to return to my utopian project, this solution, of course, the solution that I propose requires the use of force. So again, democracy wouldn't work. Of course, there should be the self-governance in the university, but it is only from the managers, actually, from the leaders of the university, that these push for integration could come. Not speaking of the leadership of the state. So, and the managerial terms should, in this sense, be modified, because the leading scholars, the representatives of the academic governance, should return to the positions of the presidents of the universities. I think here we should return to the former practice. But the university needs more leadership and not less. Another sphere where more pressure is needed is precisely the interdisciplinarity. Scholars should actually be taught to critically consider and gradually abandon the conditional outlooks of their disciplines. Only this would allow producing genuine interdisciplinary knowledge, I think. So interdisciplinarity also requires power. If people just put into the same room and they said, okay, just talk to each other and produce interdisciplinary text, this doesn't work, and we witness from time to time. I am involved in many interdisciplinary projects, and they always end up with this, that people don't know what to talk about. They continue doing their work the way they were trained. So some force should be applied there, and where is the instance from which this force can be applied? There is no such instance, because the leadership of the university is bureaucrats. In the best case, they are former academics who became bureaucrats. But so this inner transformation of the relationship between the university and society this restoration of their mutual enrichment, mutual exchange, the overcoming of the deep split between the intellectual and the manual labor, which no longer corresponds to the historical situation. This is what is needed, but where can this reform come from? In the full scale, this can only come from some kind of utopian revolutionary state, because this requires, for example, a violation of spontaneous business interests or of the professional interests of career scholars. Again, some force, some violence is needed. However, it is the only way to re-intellectualize society and to re-socialize intellect. So lacking the ideal, one can incrementally move into this direction, even with the present structure of state. Let's say a normal welfare state, a social democratic state, is quite capable, if it wants to move into this direction. And here I would like to end. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for a very interesting lecture. We have a few comments in the chat from Alison Tyson, some of which are really interesting, especially the point about the artificial intelligence and what sort of impact this could have on the intellectual and labor split. If you could perhaps comment on that, or if Alison wants to develop further that thought that she mentioned in the chat, that would be amazing.
I just want to say thank you for just a brilliant talk. I think that what was mentioned was, if the force is understood by the people and the rationale for the internship as part of a social contract, how would the internships be supervised? They'd need to be supervised by somebody like you, who understands the rationale and the quality, to make sure they've got the multicultural dispositions of the academy and of the workplace, and to understand the morality of the split and the potential impact of further splits when AI is developed. But also, if there is a call to address the questions of these multicultural teams, the leaders may be self-selecting if they understand the benefits that are mutually of interest to them and their disciplines. Because I think what we're seeing is we're not really going to ever get to a point of, I guess, light speed if we do destroy this planet to get to another one, whilst we have an immoral situation with at least one person in poverty. I think there is a kind of a universal net, if you like, suspended between stars that we won't be able to access, because we won't have the moral code to be able to do that. And the moral code, I think, comes with that foundation of everyone has a basic quality of life. So I'm just wondering if this if what you're saying, you're talking about it being utopian, but maybe it's the only way in which we're ever going to be able to survive what you're proposing as a human group of people on this planet.
Well, I agree that this is needed, and I agree that this is in principle, this requires a very strong change. So I am not very optimistic. But what you started with, I think it is a very good point, that of course such mutual internships, they would not make sense without some kind of system of supervision. So I mentioned the need for some kind of enlightened leaders in the head of the universities, but here it seems like there should be an entire party, something like a party that would do this supervision. So yeah, I mean, some kind of, and I don't want to push for my own discipline. Let's call it theory, but there should be some kind of net of scholars who can play the role of leaders in uniting these separate jigsaw puzzles. But with internship, actually, even in the current, like as I say, Russian Ministry of Education, what it suggests is that an intern, but they talk only of students. An intern has necessarily two supervisors, one within the university and one within the firm where she works. So some kind of logic is there already. Yeah, and apart from that, I agree. Now there are more questions here. Artificial intelligence. I would like to hear more about what you mean. Obviously, artificial intelligence is very important. The question is that, you know, it's somehow related to our natural intelligence, even though there is no such thing. In principle, since we are talking about some kind of technological rationality, artificial intelligence is technological, right? So here we return to the question of like intellectual and manual labor. It should be somehow combined. So for example, in contemporary theory, there's a lot of discussion of what a code is, what kind of universe do we inhabit if this is a universe of codes, of machines. These things are being discussed, and artificial intelligence in one of the areas where there's some kind of combination or reintegration of technology with ontology is needed. But of course, we cannot simply succumb to artificial intelligence, become its slaves. This would be like anti-utopia. Now, Anatoly, maybe Anatoly, who is here, can say it aloud, not only in written.
Yes, thank you, Artemy. Of course, I can do so. I basically have just two questions, and the first one, let me find it in the chat. Oh yeah, so basically you're suggesting a top-down, like what you're suggesting is a top-down model. You're admitting yourself that for implementing such a model, what we will need perhaps is some form of a party. In the absence of this top-down authority, in the absence of this dictatorial authority, are there any really existing bottom-up practices that we as part of the university and as aspiring members of civil society can employ to at least start moving in that utopian direction that you have just outlined? And the second question that I have is basically, you described two tendencies in the beginning, or two problems rather. The first problem is the problem of the ivory tower that we need to get out of there. And the second problem is the internal split that we need to speak in one voice. And so to me, these are problems that require solutions that push us in different direction. So the question is, how do we get out of an ivory tower and build broad coalitions and alliances, while at the same time speaking in the unified voice, which is required to overcome the internal division inside the university?
Yeah, to the first question, yes, actually, again, even with these interdisciplinary collectives, there are good examples, positive examples. We can all discuss what they are in each particular field. So I'm not entirely pessimistic. I'm just saying that as a rule, this doesn't work. And no one prevents intelligent people like you and I to sit down and to develop such an interesting interdisciplinary project. For example, or to think of other ways, like of a dialogue, for example, between natural sciences and humanities. I'm saying that this is not what is happening on the mass scale in the universities. By some geniuses, yes, but normally this is not what happens. What happens is the opposite. So, and I agree with you. Yes, what can be done top down can also be done bottom up. But this bottom up would be very sporadic and you know, developing in the unfriendly circumstances. Yes, and to the second question, I don't quite agree that the dialogue with civil society, with economy, would necessarily mean an abandonment of the unitary discussion or unitary theory. No, I would say that the one requires the other, because again, if the university doesn't have an authority of something that relates to general pictures of the society, general picture of the world, then for example, an intern, let's say a person is 50 years old and she comes for a year into university after working in an IT company. If the university continues to be like, okay, you believe God exists and I don't believe God exists. You think that the world consists of matter and I am a social constructivist and I don't think the world exists. And the person comes to this university from an IT firm and she thinks that all these people are nuts, and she starts teaching these people, not listening to them. That's what I would do. I mean, why would I really take seriously a company of people who are so divided in their very basic worldview and methodology? And indeed, in our society, most people who do real work, they are totally convinced that they are smarter than the university scholars. They are those who do real things if they're successful, who actually earn more, not always, but mostly. And there is absolutely no reason why they would be at least interested in some kind of theoretical learning. But as a representative of a university, I don't think it's a good thing. I think there is a problem there. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you. We have
Thank you.
another question in the chat, which is from Nemtsov, who asked about the role of traditional branches of humanities. If Nemtsov would like to elaborate on that question, or we can just go straight to it.
I just can repeat it. First of all, thank you for this great meeting. It's very impressive and very educative. My question is very easy, and I think it's very classical. What to do with classic studies, with all the people who learn something totally unpractical, something that belongs to the pure knowledge, and they cannot sell themselves to the industry or to someone else. So what is the proposed future in this future university about which you, Artemy, tell us? Maybe you have some ready-made question, because these ready-made answer, because this question must appear quite often. So just please tell a couple of words about this. Thank you.
Yeah, there are two answers to this. Well, first of all, the model, the utopian model I propose, would mean that a person who worked, I don't know, in retail, when she is 50 years old, she comes and she studies ancient Greek for a year. And this is what already is happening. This is not some kind of fantasy. People, you know, lifelong learning, they want to do these things. They come sometimes to the university, sometimes to some kind of paid courses for adults, but they do this. The problem is that, of course, the state nor their business, they don't give them breaks for this. So they just do it in their free time after work, which doesn't help them to study ancient Greek. So in my utopian society, which inspired again by the high ideals of Marx and Engels, there should be a free time, an obligatory free time for everyone to do this, for self development, time for self development through this. Yes, I mean, classical languages will probably not help them in their work, but this is not what we are discussing. This would help in some kind of accomplishment of their personality. While within the university, classical languages, like any other discipline, is excessively compartmentalized. Again, we can be a little nostalgic there. The world has seen great classical scholars who were very universal, very erudite, like Nietzsche, for example. And if we now have a person who only knows everything about 30 years in Rome in the second century AD, then maybe we don't need such a narrow scope.
That's the answer. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we might have time for one last question, which was posted by Ekaterina, and it's about the chronology of the managerial turn in university, that if there was any timeline, and in the case of Russia, if it could be the legacy of a highly bureaucratized Soviet system. So if please you could address that one last question briefly.
Yes.
And yeah.
Hello. This is my question, and once we were discussing the problem of bureaucratization in education system in personal, so I have this like the question for clarifications of for the clarification of the timeline of the gap of this period, when this turn happened.
The managerial turn, the so-called managerial turn, started happening. I mean, there is literature on this. Sometimes they write about managerial university, sometimes entrepreneurial university. You can look at the work of Henri Giroux, for example, but there are many others. This started in the 90s as a part of 80s and 90s as a part of the neoliberal reform. But in Russia, it started happening later, in the late 2000s. There was a large-scale reform which introduced all these KPIs, which actually started requiring publication from the faculty, which hadn't happened before. So even though the Soviet system, and particularly the post-Soviet system, they were bureaucratic, yes, but they gave a lot of freedom and autonomy to scholars, actually. They were not too efficient in the contemporary sense. So this new bureaucracy functions in an entirely different way.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was very brief, so we might have time for this time really the very last question from Faru. Faru, if you would like to comment on it.
Sorry for not showing my face. I'm not fully dressed, but I think this question is very plain and easy to address. So I remember reading a lot about the rising interest to the humanities and critical theories in the 1960s, and I remember that how it ended in Europe, in Central Eastern Europe as well. The social mobilization, street protests, and I think like everyone was reading some humanities of one kind, mostly left theories. As a response to injustices and intrusive state, war, global violence, and global division and injustice. So, do you think this moment could be back sometime soon, or is it already happening? Or, from your experience, from your observation, is it happening? And if not, would it ever happen again? Thank you.
Well, I don't quite share your historical view. I think that what you described did indeed start happening in the humanities in the United States. This was not the trend in Europe. This was not the reason why people turned to humanities. The humanities remain more autonomous there. And what happened in the last two decades is that this, in the framework of this Imperial University, that this kind of left oppositional switch within the American university, which indeed happened through humanities and social sciences in the post-colonial field of work, for example. It became universal, so everyone is doing this now, and this is of course one of the very beneficial trends in the development of a contemporary university. However, this doesn't necessarily address what we are talking about here, the question of the social change, of the influence of the university society-wide. Therefore, this, let's say, left liberal trend, in particular the post-colonial trend, risks becoming an academic sport. It risks dividing the increasingly leftist university from the increasingly conservative populace. This is what we observe in the United States, Trump, and blah, blah, blah. This is, so on the one hand, this is good. On the other hand, this is a symptom that the crisis is developing.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. So this was perfect timing. Thank you for being here today, for joining us for this session. Thank you very much to Dr. Magun for speaking to us and for presenting the topic. This was it for this session. We will hope to see you at the other sessions and panels that will take place today. The next panel will start in 15 minutes. So we will all hope to meet you there as well. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you all. I will try to participate in some of the events again. Okay.
Thank you.